Hey guys, how's everybody doing? We're going to take a look at number 1 from 2017 now. As usual, these are going to be worth 9 points, so I'm going to work you through the whole rubric, and I need at the end for you to just pop onto Google Classroom and leave a comment on your work so that I can track everybody's progress, okay? So in number 1 we have a digits class. Digits class has one instance field. It's called digit list, and it is an array list of integer objects. We also have one constructor and one method. The constructor is what we're implementing in part A, assuming that's just going to initialize any and all instance fields and then give them whatever value is necessary. The is strictly increasing method is all about part B, is what we're implementing in part B, and looks like if I jump ahead it's going to return true if the digits in our digits objects are strictly increasing. Great, okay, that's easy enough. So, just so we make sure we understand everything completely, in part A here, we give us a couple examples of constructors. This digits object called D1 was created with this giant number, and it initialized our digit list, array list, to hold 15704, which is exactly what I thought it was going to hold. It's the digits of this number in the order that they appear in the number. If I pass in the number 0, then we just have one object or one element in an array, and it is 0. And always think about why they give you the examples that they do. If you go about this in a mathy way, you may accidentally miss this one because you're probably thinking of a bunch of examples that wouldn't start with 0, but what about the actual number 0 itself? So I'll show you. There's really two approaches to this constructor. You can either treat the number as a number and be cool and mathy about it, or you convert the number into a string and then it doesn't take as much work. It takes a little bit more memory and loses elegance, but it would still work if you turned your number into a string and then proceeded. But if you are doing this the cool mathy way, then you might miss out on this one. And so let's just jump into it and I'll show you what the heck I'm talking about. So here we have our constructor. The first thing that you have to remember is you need to initialize any and all instance fields. This only had one, the thing called digit list, that is going to be a new array list of integers. So you're going to get 1 point right there for initializing your digit list array list. If you forgot that, lost a point right there. And also, this constructor would never make any sense. But that's a whole other thing. You got to make sure you initialize any and all instance fields in your constructor. Okay. Now this is the mathy way to do it. And this is why they gave us that special case of just passing in a 0. If number is 0, then just add 0 to your digit list and you're done. If it's anything else though, then you're going to get cool, loopy, and mathy about it. While that number is greater than 0, we're going to do that num mod 10. This is a trick that you've used before. Hopefully you remember it. Num mod 10 will always give you the last digit in a number. But I don't want to just add that number. If I just use the regular dot add, then I'm going to, if I take that last example of like 15704, whatever it was, then it's going to add a 4, and then it's going to add a 0, and then it's going to add a 7, and then it's going to add a 5, and then a 1. So all my numbers are going to be totally backwards. So I want to use the overload add method, and I want to tell each of the digits to go to element 0, to index 0. But every time I put a new one at index 0, it's going to slide everything forward. So I'll get all my digits in the correct order if I tell every single one starting from the back end to go to index 0. So if you're following this, I will take this number mod 10 and I'll get 4. So I'll put 4 right here. And then I'll go back to it in a second. And then I divide the number by 10, which chops off the last digit. So now the last digit is 0. So when I do mod 10 again, I will get 0. And now I'll have a 0 at index 0. But the 4 gets pushed to index 1. You get that? And then I chop off the 0 by dividing the number by 10. Now the new last number is 7. So when I do mod 10, I'm going to get 7. And I'm going to tell it to go to index 0, which pushes the 0 and the 4 forward to the right. And by the end of this, I'll have all my numbers in order. The 4 will have gotten pushed all the way to the end. You get how this works? On that last loop, I will have divided that number down to the number 1. And when I divide it by 10 again, for the last time, 1 divided by 10 is going to be 0. So that's why my while loop shuts down. So let's take a look at the code again so it makes sense. Okay. Sorry, computer's a little laggy today. Alright, so initialize your instance field. Special case, if the number is 0, just put a 0 in your digit list and you're done. If it is 0, then this while loop won't even work. It won't run at all. So there's no need to have like a special if, else if case or whatever. If it isn't 0, then I'm going to add the last digit at index 0 to the digit list. And then I'll divide that number by 10 and start the while loop over again. So we've got 5 points available here for your constructor. 1 point for correctly initializing your instance field, the array list. Another point, and this is for identifying any digit whatsoever in num. So you could really screw this up, but somehow just identify a single number somehow, somewhere in num. And if you did that in any way, give yourself a point. So I'm giving myself that point right here because num mod 10 identifies a digit of num. So that's 1 point for identifying a digit in num. Another point for adding at least one of our digits to the array list. So I'm giving myself the second point in the exact same place because I've identified a digit and I'm adding it to digit list. So give yourself a point if you added anything into digit list as long as it was an actual number in num. A third point, or I guess a fourth point, is going to be for adding all of the digits to your list. Now this has to be done in the context of a loop. It doesn't really make sense doing it any other way. You got to get loopy. So a point for, I was going to point with my finger, that doesn't help very much. 1 point for identifying any digit in num. That's what I would give myself a point for right there. 1 point for adding any number at all into digit list as long as it's a number in your num. Another point for adding all of the digits into num in the context of a loop. So that's this check mark here. I'm using this while loop to accomplish that goal. Your fifth and final point is for getting all of them into the array list and also in the correct order. So basically, mission accomplished, give yourself a 5th point. 5 points for the initializing the instance field, for finding any number whatsoever in your num, for adding a number into your digit list, array list, for getting all of them into your array list, and a 5th point for getting all of them into your array list in the correct order. Okay? Now here's your other option. It's not as mathy and cool, but it definitely works, and a lot of students take this approach. I still have to, you can see I almost forgot, so if you're doing this by hand, make sure you give yourself some room in case you got to squeak back in and add a line of code. Digit list equals new array list of integers. Initialize your array list. That's point 1. The second, now the logic that I'm going to apply here is treating my number like a string. So you can use integer.toString and make a stringy version of the number, or the cheapest way to turn a number into a string is to just concatenate an empty string onto it and save it as a string. That's cheap and easy. So now I have a string that is exactly the same as my number. And now that it's a string, I can loop through and use substring to just grab one thing at a time and add it into my array list. So I will loop through for I equals 0 through the entire string, digitlist.add s.substring I plus 1. Oh, and you know what? Now that I'm looking at it, I realize I probably should have wrapped that in an integer.parse. Otherwise, I won't be able to get it into an integer array list because this is a string. So, whoops, my bad. If this is wrapped in an integer.parse, then we should be good. So that's your other game plan. That would also work. Okay. Let's take a look at part B now. Part B's mission is to get the is strictly increasing method working correctly. So we're going to return true if the digits in the array list are strictly increasing. That means you can't have like a tie from one element to the next. I won't bother going back to the examples. I'm sure you went over them. But if you have two numbers in a row that are the same, you fail. Obviously, if you have a number and then a smaller number, you fail. I want the numbers to be strictly increasing. Excuse me. So this is worth 4 points here. We're going to get 1 point for comparing at least one identified consecutive pair of elements in the array list. That is me. I'm giving myself that point right here. I'm using a loop, obviously, and so digitlist.getI and digitlist.getI plus 1, those will be a consecutive pair of elements in the digitlist array list. I'm giving myself a point for comparing that consecutive pair. A second point would be for determining if a consecutive pair of digit list is out of order, obviously in the context of a loop. So I'm giving myself that second point in the exact same line here because I want to know if this digit, the one that comes before this one, is greater than or equal to the one that comes after it. So if you have two digits in a row, I want to know if the one that comes first is greater than this one or even equal to this one. And in that case, I have failed. That means I either went down or I tied, and either one is a fail. So in that event, I am going to return false, but that's not what you're getting the point for. You get 2 points here for comparing any consecutive pair of elements and for seeing if, for determining if that pair is out of order. A fourth point is for comparing all necessary consecutive pairs of elements. So I'm giving myself that point right up here for setting the loop up properly. This has to be done in a loop. I'm going to go from the very beginning to the second to last elements. So you could have less than or equal to digit list size minus 2, or you just say I is less than digit list dot size minus 1. Either way, I need to shut the loop down at the second to last element so that this doesn't break right here. I plus 1 is going to look one element ahead of wherever our loop stops, so you want to make sure you don't break yourself. So, yep, there you go. That loop header is accomplishing my third task here, making sure I compare every possible consecutive pair of elements in the array list. Your fourth point is for returning true or false appropriately and in the right spots. So again, this is your mission accomplished point. Do you return false and do you return true under the right conditions? There's no way you should have a return true statement inside of the loop. There's no if statement you could put in here that would satisfactorily determine that every element is going in increasing order. You can only tell if you fail in the context of the loop. So in the loop, if you tied or if you went down, obviously you failed, so you can return false. But just because you found an element that went up does not mean you can return true. It does not mean that you were successful. So you can only learn that you have failed in the loop. So please make sure you only have return false in here and save return true for your default at the end. Anyway, those are all 9 points. Go ahead and score your work and leave a comment on Google for me so I know how you did. Let me know if you have any questions.